Committee will come to order. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Wray, for being here with us today. Before I ask anything, let me just echo the comments made by others, and especially the ranking member, decrying the state of political violence in this country. It's completely unacceptable. We have a democratic system that allows for us to disagree, but not to take those disagreements to violence. That's what we have elections for. And I want to also thank you and all of the FBI for the work that you do, and frankly, the abuse, unwarranted abuse and criticism that have been directed to you by conspiracy theorists and others. It doesn't make your hard job any easier, and I want you to know that many of us notice that and appreciate the work that you and your team are doing. Let me just ask a couple of quick questions. First, many of us are interested in the motives of the shooter here. When it's an assault on a political figure, you immediately assume there's a political motive, and that may be the case here. We don't know yet. But I was interested in what you're seeing on his phone. The press has reported that he had pictures not only of Mr. Trump, but of Mr. Biden and various other members, political figures. Can you discern, was there an element of mainly Republicans, mainly Democrats? Was it all over the board? Can you enlighten us about that?
Well, this is a place where it's particularly important for me to reiterate the caveat that I've included before, because in this instance in particular, we have a lot of legal process out for additional accounts and things like that that the shooter is associated with. So we're hoping to learn more, and we're still exploiting a number of the digital devices. Right. I think it's fair to say that we do not yet have a clear picture of his motive, and I think it's important for me to explain, because I understand, of course, why everybody wants to know the answers to those questions. Often in an investigation, from interviewing people that the subject was in close contact with, looking at the individual's social media accounts, messages, often things, physical evidence in the person's residence. You might see a manifesto, things like that. We're not seeing that yet, but we are digging in hard, because this is one of the central questions for us. What I can say is that the shooter appears to have done a lot of searches of public figures in general, but so far we're seeing kind of news articles and things like that, and so the images that have been reported about, really what we're talking about there are when you do a news search of an article, the image appears in the cache, as opposed to like a search for that specific individual. But again, I really want to be clear that that's a place that we're doing a lot of work right now, and some more to come on that.
Well, I thank you for that clarification. We're interested also in the role of access to weapons when it comes to this terrible crime. The shooter used a semi-automatic rifle, really a weapon of war, that sadly has also been used in mass shootings around the country, including in my own district. It seems to me that the assault weapons ban that was once in place has to be a part of the national answer to curbing the epidemic of gun violence in America. I wonder if you could, with your help, Director Wray, understand a few aspects of the investigation. It's my understanding that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, was quickly able to trace the gun's purchaser, using records from an out-of-business gun store, records that the government is required to correct. Some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have suggested that collection should stop. There have been efforts to digitize it, which have been resisted. Can you tell us about how the origin of this gun purchase was discovered and the technology used?
I guess what I can say is we located a number of firearms associated with the shooter and his family. I think it was a total of, 14 in the house. The weapon that he used for the attempted assassination was an AR-style rifle that was purchased legally, that he, is my understanding, acquired, bought actually from his father, who was the one who originally bought it, again, legally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time has expired, so I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you. Director, I'll try to ask questions that are answerable too. I think that's been done pretty well on both sides. You do the advanced threat assessment and deliver that information as to the general threat and then specifics as to protected people to the Secret Service. Is that correct?
Well, sort of. The Secret Service does a threat assessment, but they're doing that based on intelligence that they receive from a number of sources, including, of course, the FBI. So we share, whenever we have threat information related to a particular individual or protectee, and we share it with the Secret Service at a number of levels.
So you're a participant, but ultimately the responsibility for threat assessment as to these individuals belongs to the Secret Service.
Well, again, the threat assessment for the individual belongs to the Secret Service, but we are an important part of that because we share threat information, if we have any. They get threat information from a variety of sources.
So, and you get them from that same variety of sources. They've got no sources that are excluded from the FBI, do they?
Well, I don't know. I'm not aware of any that are excluded from the FBI, but they may receive information that comes directly to them that didn't come to us.
Sure. Okay. Director, do you believe that former President Trump was a high-risk threat under your assessment?
Well, I believe that former President Trump, really, frankly, like any president or former president, is a very high-profile figure and attracts a lot of, unfortunately, the kind of threats we've been talking about.
It's fair to say, not on a scale of 1 to a million with little nuances, but on a scale of 1 to 10, President Trump's risk was very similar to a current president, very similar to, because he was the presumptive nominee and leading in the polls and so on, that he was a high risk by any standard. Is that correct?
Certainly, there's a reason why he has so much protection around him.
Okay. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the son of assassinated senator and the nephew of an assassinated president, would you say he was also, as a presidential candidate, at significant risk?
Again, I think any presidential candidate raises some level of risk. It might vary from candidate to
No, but it's clearly a risk. Okay. In a nutshell, the day before this attack, President Trump was documented not to have gotten on multiple occasions from the Secret Service what they asked for. The day after, it looks like they're getting more. The day before, RFK had been denied by the president multiple times, Secret Service protection. The day after, he now has it. So now my question is the actions of a 20-year-old with a lone gunman on a roof sufficient to change the risk assessment in your mind for President Trump and RFK? Or are we just realizing the threat that was always there and being more appropriate in matching it? And I know that's a little vague, but you've been at this for a long time. Hindsight is 20/20. Now that we have hindsight, is it fair to say that giving Robert F. Kennedy Jr. security, upping the security, including drones, overhead support for the president, former president, these are all things that in hindsight should have been done the day before?
Well, let me try to answer your question this way. Of course, as I said, the assessments of the level of security to be provided to individual protectees.
No, I understand it's a Secret Service decision.
But what I would say to you is that, and I've been saying for quite some time, including in front of committees of this Congress, that we are in an elevated threat environment, and we have been for some time. And that comes from a variety of quarters. It is, quite frankly, a dangerous time to be a prominent public official.
And in regards to that, the other side has spent a lot of time talking about what people on the right have said. But there was an attempted assassination on a Supreme Court justice. We have had the highest-ranking senator on the other side of this body saying that there were actions, that they were accountable. We have had multiple members of Congress in both the House and the Senate berating the character of members of the Supreme Court as a result of their decisions made, both, sometimes 6-3, sometimes unanimous, whatever. Are those comments, not any one of them, but are those comments and the generation of that sort of, oh, this guy's bad for democracy, this Supreme Court justice is a threat to democracy, is that the kind of thing that raises the threat level, and would you caution against that?
Well, I do believe that we've seen an increase in threats of violence, which again, that's the FBI's lane, not rhetoric, no matter how despicable or heated it is, but violence and threats of violence. We have seen an uptick in threats towards judges, among other prominent public officials, including, as you say, a case that we helped investigate involving a threat to a sitting Supreme Court justice.
An attempt.
An attempt.
Yeah, thank
Correct.
you.
Right. I think it's a reflection of a broader phenomenon that we are seeing in this country where people, again, very passionate, I respect that, very angry, I respect that, but there's a right way and a wrong way to express yourself when you're angry. And violence and threats of violence just can't be it. And that's where we fit in. It's not my role as FBI director to call out particular people's rhetoric. There's a place for that, but that's not my role as FBI director. But when it turns to violence and threats of violence, that has to be treated as unacceptable, and that's the way we look at it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Director, when did the FBI learn that Iran was threatening President Trump's life?
So I want to be a little bit careful here, not to talk about specific classified information, but we have been for quite some time, and I'll stick with what's in the open record. We, for some time, and I in particular for some time, have been calling out the efforts by the Iranian government to attempt to retaliate for the killing of Soleimani by going after current or former prominent U.S. officials, and we've even had an indictment against it. And I think that we need to recognize the brazenness of the Iranian regime, including right here in the United States. And I expect that we're going to see more of it, and I expect there'll be more coming on that. I'm not aware of any threat information related to protectees that wasn't, passed in a timely way, but I can't really get into specifics here.
It's the minority's time here, but I just felt that was a question the committee needed to understand, and it sounds like you've known that for a long time, and that information was conveyed to the Secret Service?
Any information related to threats against the former president, which again, as we've sort of talked about, happens all too often, is something that we have a whole process we routinely share with the Secret Service on a number of levels in a timely way, and to my knowledge, that has consistently been followed.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here.
In a timely way, and to my knowledge, that has consistently been followed.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Director Wray. Director Wray, the FBI is the independent law enforcement agency under the Department of Justice. Is that correct?
Yes.
And does the FBI director currently report to anyone?
Well, you mean in a chain of command reporting structure kind of thing? Yeah, so FBI is part of the Justice Department. On the org chart, you would see that the FBI director, and this has been true for decades, reports to the Deputy Attorney General, who reports to the Attorney General. Obviously, reports in a communication sense, I report to any number of people.
As opposed to a micromanagement reporting system.
Correct.
And you would take issue, would you not, with any proposal that would change or alter that chain of command and place you or place a FBI director in the position of reporting directly to the president, would you not? You would oppose that?
I don't think that would be a wise reporting structure. I think the structure that we've had for decades now makes sense. I think there's a difference between independence in a sort of organizational structure perspective and independence in terms of the way you do the work. Obviously, the FBI is part of the Justice Department.
Well, reporting directly to the president would eliminate your independence, would it not?
I don't think it would help.
Yeah. And you're familiar with Project 2025, are you not?
I mean, I've seen news reports about it. I'm not particularly familiar with it.
You're aware that it is a game plan for President Trump's first 120 days in office, correct?
I'm really not familiar with the details. Again, I've seen reporting about it.
It is, and what he proposes to do is to force the FBI director to appoint, report directly to him. That's what he wants to do within the first 120 days. He also wants to eliminate the position of FBI General Counsel. That is also set forth in Project 2025. How would you recommend that?
I think the FBI's Office of General Counsel serves an incredibly important role, including in terms of advising our workforce. We have 38,000 people. The idea of having an organization like ours, an independent law enforcement agency like ours that doesn't have its own general counsel's office doesn't make sense to me.
Well, it would seem like any proposal that would force the director to report to the president, and then there would be no legal counsel for the director of the FBI. That seems like it's an attempt to neuter the FBI and render it accountable only to the president. Isn't that correct?
Well, let me put it this way. I recognize that the FBI director, this FBI director and every FBI director before me serves at the pleasure of the president, and that's part of our system. I was appointed by President Trump. I respect that. I think that's a part of our structure. But independence in terms of how we do our work is what matters to me, and we need to be able to do our work in a way that is free from political interference.
Well, you wouldn't be able to do that by reporting everything you do to the president and getting his authority and approval before you take action, correct?
I don't think that would be a wise approach.
And then there's even a proposal to replace many of those 38,000 dedicated civil servants who work for the FBI, replace them with a MAGA group that has pledged its allegiance to Donald Trump. What danger would that bring to the FBI if that were to happen?
Well, again, I haven't read or reviewed
Well,
this thing that you're
assuming
referring to.
what I say is
but
true,
the FBI is
would
made
that
up of the FBI is made up of 38,000 dedicated career law enforcement professionals. It has no political appointees of any kind, unless you count me as a
You don't
nominee
want
of
that
the
to
former
change
president.
either, do
I
you?
don't think that should change.
You
I
don't
think
want
that is
a bunch
that's
of
how we do
loyalists
our work.
being the employees of the FBI.
We're coming up on 116
it would-
years of the FBI, and that's the way it has been for 116
It would
years.
be crazy to take 38,000 MAGA loyalists and put them at the FBI. That's frightening. That's what Project 2025 proposes, and I'm glad to know that you are not with that program, and with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Was the shooter on the FBI's radar in any way prior to the assassination attempt?
We did not have any information about the shooter. He was not in our holdings before the shooting.
No communication in any chat rooms, no CIs or confidential human sources have any interaction with?
No, we've run a thorough search for the subject through all of our holdings, and he was not in them anywhere.
Were there any FBI agents or informants present at the Trump rally in Butler?
Not to my knowledge.
And Mr. Jordan was talking to you about Iran. Were law enforcement resources diverted from the protection of President Trump to John Bolton as a consequence of concern that Mr. Bolton might have been the target of Iranian malign efforts?
That's really a Secret Service decision. I don't know the answer to that. That's really something they would know better. What I can tell you is that there are a number of individuals. You mentioned one who we've brought a case, a specific criminal case for the Iranians targeting for assassination. But how the
Are you
Secret
going to
Service
get that
allocates-
answer to us, whether or not resources were diverted from Trump to Bolton? Is that just going to be part of your review?
I think that's going to be part of the reviews by the Inspector General.
The Inspector
and the
General for
after-
DHS, right?
Of DHS
Right,
and the
I-
outside
got it.
panel.
And I think
after
that's an
action.
important point, because the Inspector General for DHS has really fallen out of favor with the administration, because he's been pointing out all the problems on the border with Mayorkas and Biden, and we're always kind of worried that they're about to fire him, which would be a really bad idea now that this role that you've identified is so critical. Be a bad idea to fire the IG for DHS during the pendency of this, right, Mr. Director?
I don't think that would be a good idea.
I'm with you on that. So I want to zoom out a little bit. How often do you brief President Biden?
I mean, on this
No, just
specific
generally.
case?
No, in your role as FBI director.
I mean, I don't know that I could give you a number.
Is it like weekly, monthly, daily?
It's not at a regular cadence. There have been times when there have been months at a time when I haven't, and then there have been times when several days apart I have.
Okay.
It's always with other people.
The vice president, is she typically there?
Often has been.
Okay, so when did you notice his decline?
My interactions in my role, all my interactions with the current president have been completely professional.
Right, but I mean the cognitive decline. I'm not saying he treated you unprofessionally, just maybe not picking things up as quickly as he used to.
Again, I don't meet with him very often, but what you're describing is not something that I've observed during my interactions with him.
I mean, I had it observed so often that the ranking member and Mr. Schiff on this committee have said that he could no longer continue as a candidate. And so, since you're the FBI director, I was just sort of wondering, like, who's running the country? If something bad happened, you'd have to go brief President Biden about it right now, God forbid.
And on any number of occasions, I have briefed the president, and as I said, those briefings have all been uneventful and unremarkable.
Oh, I can imagine them being uneventful. But in the work where the vice president's also present, like you say, there's like more than half the time there's these briefings, she's there too?
I don't know if I'd said more than half the time. Certainly, there have been times where she's been present. There have been other times where she hasn't.
I take you at your word when you say this is the most complicated threat environment you've ever observed over a long career in law enforcement. And I'm just kind of wondering, with this assassination attempt, with the invasion at our border, with all the Hamas that have been let in that you've talked about and briefed about, like, is Biden up to it? And if he's not up to it, and you're a guy who's been regularly briefing him, like, who's been in on this conspiracy to hide the real Joe Biden from all of us for years? It never occurred to you that this guy wasn't up to it in all these briefings you did?
As I said, my briefings with the president have all been completely fine.
Were they between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m.?
He's asked questions. There hasn't been anything of note in the area that you're talking about.
Yeah, did you ever have to brief him before 10 a.m. or after 4 p.m.? We hear those are as good hours.
I've certainly times that I have briefed have included outside those hours.
Right, okay. I just, I think the American people want to know how we got to this point with someone who's so diminished his own party has basically put him out to pasture. And since you had close proximity and the vice president had close proximity, just kind of wondering if you were being straight with all of us about how things were going with him. I guess we'll have to figure that out.
You can count on me to be straight with you, sir.
We'll see.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to recognize, unfortunately, the fact that our colleague and my colleagues side by side mate for many, many years in this committee, Sheila Jackson Lee, is no longer with us. She was a great member and a force for America, and her loss is felt and great. Secondly, I'd like to say to the FBI director that there were some remarks made when you were introduced, preemptory remarks, saying that people don't have great faith in the FBI and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I have great faith in the FBI, and I think most of us on this side of the aisle do. And we appreciate your work and appreciate your being here. Some on the other side of the aisle have cast aspersions upon the FBI and upon law enforcement. And if they don't want to support law enforcement, that's their business. But I support law enforcement, and the FBI is the top rank of law enforcement in our country. So I thank you and all of your people that work with you. Secondly, there's been some questions about the FBI maybe being weaponized. Did President Biden ever ask you to get involved in the case in Orlando, Florida, where Kevin McCarthy says that Mr. Gates is investigated for some sexual involvement with a 17-year-old girl? Did the president or anybody in the Democratic Party, as Mr. McCarthy has suggested, weaponized you and tried to get you involved in that case?
No, sir.
Good, thank you. Just wanted to make sure of that. Butler, Pennsylvania, I read something about a ladder. He used a ladder to get up on that roof, and that the ladder was found somewhere a distance away. Is that true?
So we do know that he purchased a ladder. I think, if I recall correctly, it was about a 5-foot tall type of ladder. But importantly, we did not find the ladder at the scene. So it's not clear that he used the ladder to get on top of the roof.
So you don't think
we're
the ladder...
still digging into all that, things related to the ladder and his access to the roof. But he did buy a ladder, but the ladder was not found at the scene.
Ladder didn't have any feet on it. It didn't walk off. Thank you, sir. There have been a lot of threats against public officials. We've seen Mr. Scalise terribly shot, and we saw Gabby Gifford shot, and other congresspeople, and many of us have had death threats. And the FBI has, I think, been made aware of those to help protect us, and I appreciate that greatly. But we've also had election officials and poll workers threatened. What is the FBI doing in consultation with other law enforcement to ensure every eligible voter can safely and confidently cast a ballot this year?
So when it comes to threats to election workers in particular, we participate in the Election Threats Task Force that DOJ set up. We also, and there have been quite a number already of arrests and convictions under that task force. We have got a number of investigations underway that involve all kinds of threats to election workers, ranging from online threats to, there was even some mailings that included fentanyl. So there's been a number of types of threats to election workers. And these are, after all, people who are putting in their own time for the good of the country to try to help us have a functioning democracy. And so the idea that they would be targeted with violence is just outrageous. We are sharing information with election officials about things to be on the lookout for. We have election crime coordinators in all 50
And you'll be prepared for Election Day with additional, FBI will be looking out for.
Yes.
Thank you, thank you. Jeffrey Epstein, been in the news a lot lately about involvement with certain people high in politics involved. Did the FBI conduct the raid on his townhouse in New York when he was incarcerated in New York? There was a raid on his East Side townhouse.
Well, I don't know about a raid. I know we executed a number of searches in the course of our fairly extensive investigation related to Mr. Epstein.
Can you tell me during that search if you came across and have within the possession of the FBI tapes of him with other individuals that he might have taken in people in compromising positions?
Yeah, I don't know that there's anything I can share related to that. I can see if there's information we could provide and maybe get back to you on it.
If there were tapes of people in prominent positions, friends of his he posed for pictures with, possibly in compromising positions, it would be, the public, I think, has a right to see those.
Well, I mean, how we handle evidence recovered in a criminal investigation has all kinds of rules that apply to it. I recognize the intense public interest in the subject, but we'd have to follow our rules. But I'm happy, like I said, I'm happy to follow up with my team on it.
Thank you, sir, and I appreciate your service, and thank you for being here today.
Gentlemen, yield the last 5. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Wray, for being here. How many shots did the shooter fire?
Well, we know that he fired at least 8 because we recovered 8 cartridges on the roof.
Okay, and are all the cartridges and the unspent bullets, have they been, you know how many there are? You've accounted for all of those? I assume, yeah.
We believe we have. Again, there was lots of work still ongoing, but yes, we believe we have accounted.
And did the recovered shells, the cartridges, match the shooter's rifle?
My recollection is yes.
And you conducted analysis that confirms that?
Well, we work with ATF, but yes, so some of the work has been divided up.
And how many shells casings were recovered from the location of the counter snipers?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the last part.
From the counter snipers location?
That I don't have the answer, at least here at my fingertips.
Okay. Did the blood and tissue pattern of the shooter, did it match the stories or the witness testimony that you've heard so far?
Can you, well, I'm not sure I'm following the question.
Well, I assume you've interviewed the counter snipers, or you have that evidence, and other witnesses describing the kill of the shooter. And I'm wondering if the blood and tissue and brain matter is consistent with the testimony that you're receiving. In other words, is the physical...
In terms of the manner of death?
Exactly. Is the physical evidence consistent with where the shot from the...
Yeah, so the autopsy is being handled by, as is not unusual, the state authorities. My understanding is thus far, I don't think it's fully complete, which is not, again, not totally unusual. But so far, nothing remarkable on that front.
That's from the body itself, but from actually the scene where the shooter was found, is everything consistent with the testimony, the physical evidence at the scene? Is that consistent with the testimony you've seen, that you've heard so far?
So far, yes. Again, ongoing investigation.
Were you able to determine whether the shooter took the gun up with him when he climbed up to the top of the roof, or was it already placed there somewhere?
So that is something that we're drilling into right now that we don't know the answer to yet. I can tell you, which may be relevant, though, to your question, that, and I don't think this has been reported yet, that the weapon had a collapsible stock, which could explain why it might have been less easy for people to observe, because one of the things that we're finding is people have observed him, the first people to observe him with the weapon were when he was already on the roof, and we haven't yet found anybody with firsthand observation of him with the weapon walking around beforehand. So that doesn't mean he wasn't, obviously, but the collapsible stock is potentially a very significant feature that might be relevant to that.
Did he have a scope?
I believe so, but as I sit here right now, I don't remember.
Okay. You mentioned about 2 hours before the incident that he'd had a drone and he was using a drone. Instead of me putting words in your mouth, just tell me how you discovered the drone, how you discovered the time, and how you discovered, if you can describe what he would have been observing with the drone and how you determined that, please.
So this is something that's very much ongoing right now. We're going back and forth with our lab as they continue to do work on it. What I would say is the drone was in his car. As I said, we've been able to, by exploiting the drone, determine its use and flight paths. There were no pictures or videos on the drone of the day of the rally, for example, but we have been able to reverse engineer the flight path of the drone from the day of the rally, and that's how we know that for about 11 minutes, from I think it's around 3:50 p.m. to 4 p.m., somewhere in that range, he was flying the drone, and we have the flight path. It's about 200 yards away from where former President Trump would ultimately be speaking. And so that would have primarily given him a vantage point. I'm trying to think how to describe this. If the former president's podium is that way,
yeah,
the drone would be over here looking, say 200 yards again off this way, looking back. So it would have shown the shooter, we think. Again, we're still doing more work on this. I really want to qualify what I'm saying, but I'm trying to be transparent and lean in here. We think it would have shown him kind of what would have been behind him.
But when you say behind him, behind the shooter?
Correct. Like, in other words, almost like giving him a rear view mirror of the scene behind him, except again, he wasn't flying it overhead while he was later back for the assassination.
But he would have had, with the drone, he would have been able to also assess kind of because the stage, I assume, was already set, he would have been able to assess that angle with the rooftop as well, forward and backward, I assume.
Well, certainly going towards the podium. Again, we're still trying to figure out exactly what he saw, because we're having to, in effect, because there's no recording of what he saw during those 11 minutes, our hypothesis at this point, the experts think he would have been live streaming it. And so we're trying to, in effect, say, okay, if this was the flight pattern, given these capabilities of the drone, what would you have seen? What could you have seen for those 11 minutes? And again, it wasn't over the stage or the kind of the hub of the rally, about 200 yards away, but it looks like it would have been looking, let's say, length of a football field or so, more, kind of towards the podium.
Great, thank you, Mr.
How many separate times was the shooter on the premises?
So again, with the caveat that we're continuing to do work on it, we believe that the first time he traveled to the grounds was, I think, a week before, and he spent roughly 20 minutes there. Then he went to the grounds again on the morning of the event, it appears, for about 70 minutes, I think, but again, I qualify that. I'd have to go back and look to be sure of that part. And then he came back in the afternoon, so that would be, I guess, a third time for good. But that included things like this drone activity we just talked about.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, thank you for appearing. Thank you for the extraordinary job that you're doing. Please convey our thanks to the men and women at the Bureau for their incredible work. I've worked with them since I was an assistant U.S. attorney more than 30 years ago. Let me start with a threshold question I'm curious about. When I applied to be an assistant U.S. attorney, I had to go through a background check. Do candidates for the FBI have to go through background checks?
Yes.
Would someone with dozens of felony convictions survive a background check for the Bureau?
No.
So they would never be hired by the Bureau?
No.
Well, clearly the Bureau has, you don't have to comment on this, I know you won't, but clearly the Bureau has higher standards for their hiring than one of America's great political parties. Let me turn to the events of the tragic shooting. Have you been able to gain access to the shooter's electronic communications, social media, and with the caveats that you mentioned that the investigation is still early, have you been able to make any deductions, or are there any indications of the shooter's motivation from those electronic holdings?
So in terms of our ability to access it, we have been able to get into and exploit a number of electronic devices, digital devices, but not all of them yet. And then within his various accounts, we've been able to get access to some of them, but some of them we're still waiting on. Some of them we may never get access to because of the encryption issue, that it presents an increasingly vexing barrier for law enforcement, not just the FBI, but for law enforcement all over the country. But we're still drilling into that. We have some information. Some places we've been able to look, some places we will be able to look, some places we may never be able to see, no matter how good our legal process is. But that's what we're looking at right now. In terms of what we've been able to find so far, a lot of the usual repositories of information have not yielded anything notable in terms of motive or like ideology. Having said that, it does appear fairly clear that he was interested in public figures, kind of more broadly, and I think this is important, that starting somewhere around July 6th or so, he became very focused on former President Trump and this rally. And so one of the things that I can share here today that has not been shared yet is that we've just in the last couple of days found that from our review, to your point about devices, analysis of a laptop that the investigation ties to the shooter reveals that on July 6th, he did a Google search for, quote, how far away was Oswald from Kennedy? And so that's a search that obviously is significant in terms of his state of mind. That is the same day that it appears that he registered for the Butler rally.
And when you say that his electronic holdings indicated an interest in different public figures, without revealing anything you're not comfortable revealing about those public figures, can you tell us anything generally about them, either the offices they hold, their political party, or was it simply people of a high profile?
Well, a couple things. First, the images that we've recovered so far from, I can't remember which of his various devices, appear to be what we call cached images from searches of news articles. So if you do a news article search, of course, if there are photos on it, those photos get stored automatically in your cache, as opposed to me searching or him searching for a specific person and getting up images of that person. As far as the pictures that are like that, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of rhyme or reason to it so far, other than these are all prominent public people, but they cover both parties, they cover both U.S. people and even some foreign public officials. So that part doesn't appear to, that one repository of information doesn't appear to be overly indicative of motive, other than interest in public figures, but that could be just because he was reading news stories. So we're still trying to drill into that. That's why all of these outstanding legal process returns that we're waiting on for various accounts, platforms, et cetera, any one of them could be one that would have very indicative, very important information.
If I could be permitted one very short additional question, Chairman. From that, any indication of any other particular target, that is someone who was not just sort of generically the subject of the searches you described, but for which there was more of an interest than others?
There's the information I just described at the moment does not appear particularly indicative of targeting in its own right. But again, that dot, once we get other information, could connect in a way that might be more meaningful. But I'm sharing that piece of information with this committee and with the American public, but I think it's important that we put down a qualification. This does not appear to be some kind of target list or something like that. This is cached images from running searches of news stories. And again, there's nothing at the moment, there's no pattern from that particular piece of information that is overly remarkable so far.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.